At my wife's funeral, my daughter, Vanessa, gently pulled me aside. She whispered, "Mom's gone. Dad, sign the house over to us. We'll take care of you." Dylan, her husband, stood nearby, his eyes showing sympathy yet laced with calculation. It sounded like kindness, but I knew better. If I agreed that day, I would lose the two women I loved most. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Just 10 agonizing days had passed since Eleanor had slipped away. The quiet of the house, once a comfort, now felt like a vast, echoing chasm. This home, with every polished floorboard and intricate carving, every custom-built bookshelf, was a testament to my life with her. It showcased the dreams we'd built with my own hands as an architect. Her favorite armchair by the bay window still held the faint imprint of her form. A half-finished knitting project draped over its arm as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I couldn't pack away her things. My meticulously ordered world, once a blueprint of happy predictability, had collapsed. It was now a chaotic pile of raw, unmanageable emotion. The memory of Vanessa's words whispered amidst the hushed condolences of mourners gnawed at me. Her touch on my arm had felt like a phantom limb of comfort, a sensation I desperately craved in my profound loneliness. Dylan's hand on my shoulder, seemingly a gesture of support, had instead felt heavy, proprietary. Then her voice, laced with a practiced softness, "Mom's gone, Dad. Sign the house over to us. We'll take you in." Even through the haze of my bereavement, I saw the truth with searing clarity. This wasn't about care, it was about calculation. My home, Eleanor's sanctuary, was nothing more than a valuable asset to them. It was a means to solve their own unseen problems. If I genuinely surrendered the deed, I wouldn't just lose the house. I'd lose my freedom, my independence, and indeed the very essence of my relationship with Vanessa. The daughter I loved would cease to exist, replaced by a stranger driven by greed. My grief sharpened into a cold, hard resolve. If they wanted a fool, I would be the best damn fool they'd ever seen. Early that morning, I reached out to them. Vanessa and Dylan, with an almost indecent haste, presented the papers. They spoke of trusts and care, of future comfort and their undying devotion. Their voices were a practiced balm, their gestures solicitous. Dylan, in particular, was commendably efficient. He guided my hand to each signature line with a gentle firmness. He was the picture of a dutiful son-in-law, easing the burdens of a grieving elder. He seemed to relish the details, explaining clauses in simplified terms, ensuring my understanding. I nodded, my eyes vacant, my responses monosyllabic. I let them believe they were in control, that my grief had dulled my faculties. Every stroke of the pen was a dagger to my heart. It was a deliberate severing of the physical ties to my past, to Eleanor, to the life we'd built. This wasn't surrender, it was a strategic withdrawal. I was signing away the physical deed, but I was gaining the moral high ground. I was securing the undisputed evidence of their avarice. Vanessa's relief was almost palpable. It was a bright, brittle thing that fractured her feigned sorrow. She hugged me tightly after the final signature. She whispered, "Thank you, Dad. We'll take such good care of you." Dylan offered a firm handshake, his smile triumphant. They had what they wanted, or so they thought. They began discussing plans for their new house, talking of renovations and modern touches. They were blissfully unaware that every word was a stone in the foundation of their own downfall. I listened, my face a mask of weary acceptance, already sketching out the first lines of my counterplan in the private chambers of my mind. The grief remained a constant ache, but it was now laced with a steely patience. The play had just begun, and they had no idea they were merely actors in a drama of my own design. My old home, The one Eleanor and I had poured our lives into was now legally theirs. The very next day, a small moving truck arrived. It wasn't to take me to a retirement community, but to Vanessa and Dylan's own suburban house. "Just until we get the big house ready for you, Dad," Vanessa chirped, her voice falsely bright. "It needs a bit of work, you know, and we want to make sure you're comfortable." I nodded, feigning a weary sigh, and allowed myself to be led into their guest room. The weeks that followed were a peculiar form of psychological torment. Living under their roof, I was a constant, silent observer of their true selves. Their house, though comfortable, felt cramped and impersonal after the spacious, custom-built sanctuary I had left. I watched them interact, their masks slipping in the privacy of their own home. Dylan's financial anxieties were evident in hushed, tense phone calls he took late at night. His voice was often laced with desperation. Vanessa, meanwhile, spent hours online, researching luxury renovations for my former home. She discussed color palettes and expensive fixtures with Dylan, often with a casual disregard for the costs, assuming the house's value would cover everything. They were already spending the equity, living off phantom profits. I maintained my act with meticulous precision. I misplaced my reading glasses in obvious places, like the refrigerator. I'd ask Vanessa about a conversation we'd had just hours before, feigning a moment of blank confusion. "Did we discuss that, dear?" My memory isn't what it used to be. I'd repeat questions, my brow furrowed in a convincing display of disorientation. Sometimes I'd even forget a word mid-sentence, trailing off with a sigh, letting them fill in the blanks. Vanessa and Dylan, eager to see their narrative confirmed, devoured these crumbs of evidence. Their confidence swelled with each feigned lapse. I'd catch them exchanging smug glances, little knowing smiles that spoke volumes. "See, he's really going downhill," I imagined Dylan whispering to Vanessa. "Perfect timing. We tried our best to care for Dad at home, but he was too frail, forgetful, difficult to manage." Their increasing carelessness, born of this overconfidence, was precisely what I needed. One evening, Dylan approached me with a glass of water and a small white pill. "Dad, this is just a little something Dr. Thorne prescribed," he said, his voice smooth, almost too solicitous. "Just to help you relax. You've seemed a bit agitated lately." My stomach clenched. A sedative. They wanted me compliant. I looked at the pill, then at Dylan's expectant face, forcing a vacant smile. "Oh, a pill? How kind." I pretended to swallow it, tilting my head back, but with a practiced sleight of hand, I palmed the pill and later flushed it down the toilet. The bitter taste of their deception lingered in my mouth. They were so confident in my helplessness, so blind to my vigilance. Every observation, every indignity, every swallowed pill fueled the cold fire of my resolve. I was gathering data, building my case brick by painstaking brick right under their unsuspecting noses. The weeks I spent living under Vanessa and Dylan's roof were a masterclass in controlled agony. I continued my performance, a carefully constructed facade of frailty, and they, blinded by their greed, never suspected. Each day was a tightrope walk between convincing them and maintaining my own sanity. The generic meals, the enforced social activities they occasionally dragged me to, the constant low hum of their self-congratulatory existence. It was a stark prison compared to the vibrant home Eleanor and I had shared. But with every passing day, as Vanessa and Dylan grew more confident, more careless in their perceived triumph, my resolve deepened. They were settling into my house, making it their own, blissfully unaware that the stage was being set for their grand, humiliating fall. The true turning point came one Tuesday evening. Vanessa and Dylan believed I was deeply asleep, having taken my sedative, which I'd palmed and flushed as before. I lay in the guest room bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. The silence of their house was broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then I heard their voices muffled at first, from their bedroom down the hall. My architect's ears, trained to detect the slightest structural shift, picked up the rising inflection of Vanessa's voice, the sharper, more insistent tone of Dylan's. I eased myself out of bed, moving with the silent precision of a shadow, and pressed my ear to the wall closest to their room. The thin plaster, a testament to modern, cheaper construction, carried their words with chilling clarity. "He's deteriorating faster than we thought, Dylan," Vanessa whispered. There was a note of triumph in her voice, not concern. "He actually forgot where the bathroom was this morning, and he keeps asking about Mom's old recipes." Dylan chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. "Perfect. The longer we wait, the more confused he'll get. We need to strike while he still trusts us completely." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the house anymore. "It's time for a nursing home, Vanessa," Dylan stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "He's becoming a burden, and you know it. The house is worth almost $1 million now." Vanessa's tone shifted to pure calculation. "With the Denver market, we could probably get 900,000, maybe more. Enough to finally buy that house in Boulder we've been looking at, the one with the mountain view." My daughter actually laughed. It was a light, airy sound of pure, unadulterated greed. "God, Dylan, you should have seen him today. So grateful just to hear from me. He has no idea we're planning this." I stood there, leaning against the cold wall. My hands slowly clenched into fists. They thought I was a burden. They thought I was confused, helpless, ready to be managed and discarded. They were already spending my money, already planning their new life on the ashes of mine and Eleanor's legacy. But I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't nearly as confused as they believed. The genuine displacement I'd felt leaving my home, the hollow ache of being in their impersonal house, it all crystallized into a burning resolve. This wasn't surrender. It was the next phase of my strategy. Their next move was predictable. Within a week of that overheard conversation, Vanessa called, her voice dripping with concern. "Dad, we need to talk to Dr. Thorne. Just a routine checkup, given, you know, your memory lapses have been a bit more frequent." I knew. They wanted the official diagnosis, the medical justification for their actions. Dr. Elias Thorne had been our family physician for 30 years. He was a kind and ethical man who had seen Eleanor and me through every sniffle and serious illness. I agreed, playing the compliant patient, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what they truly sought. The appointment was a masterclass in their manipulation. Vanessa did most of the talking. She painted a vivid, exaggerated picture of my rapid deterioration. She spoke of my confusion, my wandering thoughts, my inability to manage my finances, all carefully crafted from my feigned moments of senility. Dylan nodded gravely beside her, interjecting with solemn affirmations. Dr. Thorne listened patiently, his gaze occasionally flicking to me, a quiet question in his eyes. When Vanessa finished, he turned to me. "David, how do you feel?" I met his gaze, allowing just a hint of a tremor in my voice, but my eyes remained clear. "A bit tired, Elias. The move was a lot. But my mind is as sharp as ever, thank you." I answered his questions about current events, recalled details from Eleanor's last visit, and even corrected Vanessa on a minor historical fact she misstated. Dr. Thorne concluded the examination, his expression unreadable. Later in his office, he spoke to Vanessa and Dylan privately. I heard the muffled tones, the rising frustration in Vanessa's voice. When they emerged, their faces were tight with barely concealed anger. "Dr. Thorne says, he says you're perfectly lucid, Dad," Vanessa stammered, her voice thin with disbelief. Dylan's jaw was clenched. "He refused to sign anything, said it would be unethical." The rage in his eyes was unmistakable. Dr. Thorne, a man of integrity, had held his ground. This forced Vanessa and Dylan to undertake the more dangerous act of forging the medical papers themselves. I subtly noted their desperation, the dangerous path they were now forced to tread. It was a path that would lead them directly into a legal quagmire. Their arrogance, their belief that my supposed confusion would shield them, was blinding them to the risks. Brenda Martinez, my observant neighbor and Eleanor's closest friend, was the first to visit me at Vanessa and Dylan's house. She arrived with a plate of her famous lemon bars and a worried frown. "David, dear, are you truly all right? Vanessa said you were struggling." Her eyes, sharp and kind, searched mine. I offered her a lemon bar, my hand trembling just enough to be convincing. "Just a bit overwhelmed, Brenda. The move was a lot, you know." She sat beside me, her gaze sweeping the unfamiliar living room. It all happened so fast. And Vanessa seemed so insistent. "Are you sure this is what you wanted?" I sighed, a weary, practiced sound. "They mean well, Brenda. They just worry about me." I allowed a moment of feigned confusion, asking about her cat's recent vet visit, a topic we'd discussed days ago. Brenda's brow furrowed. She stayed for an hour, her questions gentle but persistent, her gaze often returning to my eyes, trying to discern the truth. When Vanessa arrived home, Brenda cornered her by the door. "Vanessa, David seems quite lucid to me. Are you certain about his condition?" Vanessa, ever smooth, laughed dismissively. "Oh, Brenda, you know Dad, he has his good days, but the doctors confirmed it's best he's here. It's for his own safety." Brenda left with a growing unease. Her suspicions were planted exactly as I'd hoped. She was a good woman, and her quiet concern was a small comfort in my calculated isolation. A few days later, the move to Sunset Manor was orchestrated with a chilling efficiency. It left no room for sentiment. Vanessa and Dylan, transformed into a whirlwind of purposeful activity, descended upon their house like a pair of well-meaning vultures. Boxes appeared as if by magic, labeled with neat, impersonal handwriting. "Kitchen, linens, David's room." They spoke in hushed, sympathetic tones, constantly reminding me how overwhelmed I must be, how kind they were to handle everything. I watched them, a silent observer in my own life. My heart ached with each item they packed. They carefully wrapped Eleanor's delicate china, the set we'd received as a wedding gift. But I noticed they forgot to pack the worn, leather-bound photo albums that chronicled our life, or the small wooden bird Eleanor had carved for me years ago. These were not oversights. They were subtle declarations of what they valued and what they did not. Leaving their house for Sunset Manor was a physical wrench. The familiar scent of old wood and Eleanor's faint lavender, the way the morning light slanted through the bay window, the comforting creak of the stairs under my weight, all of it was ripped away. The new place, Sunset Manor, was a stark contrast. It was clean, modern, and utterly devoid of soul. My unit, as Ms. Evelyn Reed, the manager, called it, was a small, functional space with neutral walls and generic furniture. It felt less like a home and more like a well-appointed waiting room. Vanessa and Dylan bustled around, arranging my few unpacked boxes, their voices bright and artificial. "Isn't this lovely, Dad?" "So much easier to manage," Dylan exclaimed, patting my shoulder with a false heartiness that grated on my nerves. "Plenty of activities, too. You'll make so many new friends." I nodded, offering a weak, distant smile, playing my part. The genuine displacement was real, a hollow ache in my chest, but beneath it thrummed a cold, steely resolve. This was not my surrender, it was the next phase of my strategy. Ms. Evelyn Reed, the manager of Sunset Manor, was another keen observer. A woman in her late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a surprisingly warm smile, she ran the facility with quiet efficiency. She interacted with all residents, and I noticed her watching me during mealtimes during the occasional group activity I attended. Unlike Vanessa, Ms. Reed saw me as an individual, not a diagnosis. She observed my meticulous habits, the way I organized my few books, the precise order of my toiletries, my consistent punctuality. She'd often stop for a chat, asking about my architectural background, listening intently as I spoke about Eleanor or the details of my former home. Her questions were always direct, never condescending. "Mr. Vance, you seem to have a very sharp mind," she remarked one afternoon after I'd corrected a historical inaccuracy in a documentary playing in the common room. "Your daughter mentioned you were having some memory issues." I just offered a small, sad smile. "Grief, Ms. Reed. It plays tricks on the mind." She nodded, but her eyes held a quiet, knowing look. She was beginning to see the truth, or at least the stark contrast between Vanessa's narrative and my reality. Her observations would be invaluable later, an independent validation of my lucidity, a quiet counter-narrative to Vanessa and Dylan's lies. Life in confinement at Sunset Manor settled into a strange, disquieting rhythm. To Vanessa and Dylan, I was merely another resident, a grateful if slightly confused elderly father. They visited regularly, always with an air of dutiful concern, bringing me pre-packaged snacks or a new paperback from a genre I rarely read. Their visits were short. Their conversation often circled back to my comfort and adjustment. Thinly veiled inquiries about my contentment with my new, managed existence. I played my part flawlessly, my eyes holding a distant, slightly vacant look, my responses often vague or repetitive. I'd nod slowly, offer a gentle smile, and occasionally lose my train of thought mid-sentence, allowing them to finish it for me. Each performance cemented their conviction that their plan was a resounding success, that I was safely tucked away, no longer a burden but a solved problem. But beneath the facade of frailty, my mind was sharper than ever. It was fueled by a cold, burning resolve. My small functional unit at Sunset Manor became my secret command center. While they believed I was watching daytime television or participating in gentle group activities, I was meticulously planning. The pain of Eleanor's absence remained, a constant dull ache in my chest, but it no longer paralyzed me. Instead, it became the driving force, a reminder of the legacy I was fighting to protect. Every detail of their betrayal, every patronizing glance, every condescending word I cataloged and analyzed. My architect's mind, accustomed to complex blueprints and long-term projects, was now fully engaged in designing their undoing. My first step was to secure legal counsel. Discretion was paramount. I couldn't risk Vanessa or Dylan intercepting a call or discovering a letter. I remembered Mr. Henderson, a lawyer Eleanor had once recommended for a complex property dispute years ago. A man known for his quiet efficiency and unwavering integrity. I used the community's public phone, making the call during a busy lunch hour. My voice carefully modulated to sound a little weak, a little unsure, as if I were merely seeking general advice. Mr. Henderson agreed to a private consultation. Our first meeting was held at a quiet cafe far from Sunset Manor. It was neutral ground where I could speak freely. Mr. Henderson, a man with shrewd, kind eyes and a calm demeanor, listened patiently as I recounted the entire story, from the funeral betrayal to the forged medical papers. He took meticulous notes, his expression unreadable until I finished. "Mr. Vance," he said, setting down his pen, "this is a grave accusation. Do you have proof of this forgery?" "I suspect they used a specific clinic's letterhead," I replied, my voice steady. "Dr. Thorne, my family physician, explicitly refused to sign any such documents. He can corroborate my lucidity." Mr. Henderson's eyes sharpened. "That's a strong start. Now, regarding the house, you signed the deed over to them. That's a clear legal transfer. Indeed, I said, leaning forward. But I believe they committed fraud in the inducement. They presented it as a temporary measure for my care, based on a false premise of my mental decline. And I have reason to believe Dylan's business dealings might be less than transparent, which would tie into their motive. I handed him a small, worn notebook. These are my observations. Dates, times, snippets of conversations I overheard. Their financial desperation, their arrogance. It's all here. Mr. Henderson flipped through the pages. A slow smile spread across his face. Mr. Vance, you've been quite busy. This is more than just suspicion. This is the beginning of a very strong case. His professional awe was palpable. A silent validation of my meticulousness. He was genuinely surprised by the depth of my observations, a testament to my hidden intelligence. The next weeks were a delicate dance of subterfuge. My days at Sunset Manor were a carefully choreographed performance. I'd spend mornings in the common room, appearing to doze off during documentaries, occasionally muttering about Eleanor or a misplaced item. This solidified Ms. Evelyn Reed's quiet observations of my lucidity, as she often saw me later perfectly alert and engaged in a conversation with another resident. She never challenged Vanessa or Dylan directly, but her knowing glances and subtle questions to them about my progress were a quiet counter-narrative to their lies. My afternoons and evenings, however, were dedicated to the meticulous work of evidence gathering. I used a burner phone purchased discreetly online to communicate with Mr. Henderson and other contacts. I needed irrefutable proof of the forged medical documents. Mr. Henderson suggested a forensic document examiner. This required me to obtain a copy of the forged papers without arousing suspicion. I waited for Vanessa to leave her purse unattended during a visit. I feigned a sudden dizzy spell that caused me to grab her arm. While she steadied me, I managed to snap a quick, high-resolution photo of the document with my burner phone. The image was then sent to the examiner, a highly reputable independent professional whose findings would be irrefutable. The tension during this phase was a constant low thrum beneath my skin. One afternoon, while I was on a sensitive call with Mr. Henderson discussing the initial findings from the document examiner, Dylan made an unexpected visit to the retirement community. I heard his heavy footsteps approaching my unit far earlier than his usual visiting hours. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled to end the call, shoving the burner phone under my pillow. When Dylan knocked, I deliberately fumbled with the door, taking precious seconds to open it. "Dad, everything all right?" Dylan asked, his eyes scanning my small room. I blinked at him, feigning a moment of extreme confusion. "Dylan? What are you doing here, son? I thought you were at the office." I mumbled incoherently about Eleanor, about a long-ago architectural project. My voice trailed off into a confused sigh. Dylan's eyes did a quick sweep of the room, a subtle glance at my nightstand, a casual movement towards my desk. He was looking, but my meticulous hiding places held. His expression shifted from fleeting suspicion to smug satisfaction. "Just checking in, Dad. You seemed a little off on the phone earlier." He patted my shoulder, a gesture of control. "Just rest. We'll talk later." He left, convinced my decline was progressing nicely. The adrenaline surged through me. It had been a near miss, a stark reminder of the razor's edge I walked. Another incident heightened the stakes. Vanessa and Dylan, emboldened by my apparent docility and their belief in my mental decline, tried to administer a sedative before a supposed meeting with a financial advisor they claimed was for my benefit. Vanessa held out a small pill, dissolved in a glass of water. "Just to help you relax, Dad. It's a big day." My stomach clenched, but I maintained my vacant expression. "Oh, a pill? How kind." I pretended to swallow it, tilting my head back. But with a practiced sleight of hand, I palmed the pill and later flushed it down the toilet. The bitter taste of their deception lingered in my mouth. Their desperation and arrogance blinded them to the risks of their actions. They were so confident in my helplessness, so blind to my vigilance. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Dylan were settling into my house with increasing arrogance. Social media posts, which Brenda occasionally mentioned, showed them hosting lavish parties. Dylan boasted about their successful business ventures. Vanessa showcased her elegant renovations. They were living large, spending freely, convinced the house and its profits were theirs. They even began discreetly discussing putting the house back on the market for an even higher price, eager to cash in again. Their overconfidence was a beautiful, terrible thing to behold. It meant they were ripe for the fall. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every close call I survived, solidified my resolve. The stage was being set and the curtain was about to rise. The weeks leading up to the grand reveal were a crucible of anticipation. Vanessa and Dylan, oblivious to the meticulous web I was weaving, continued their lavish existence in my house. Brenda Martinez, during her weekly calls to me, would often drop casual remarks about their latest extravagance. A new car in the driveway, a professionally catered party, a mention of Dylan's big deal that supposedly funded it all. Each tidbit was a fresh insult, a new stone added to the edifice of their arrogance, but also a confirmation that they were ripe for the fall. Their social media, which Brenda with a quiet sigh occasionally showed me on her phone, painted a picture of unbridled success and effortless sophistication. They were living the dream, a dream built on my grief and their deception. I chose the housewarming party. It was Vanessa's idea, announced with fanfare on a glossy invitation that somehow found its way to Sunset Manor. A celebration of our new beginning, it read, and a chance to thank everyone for their support. The irony was a bitter tang on my tongue. Dylan had secured a loan I'd learned from Mr. Henderson to fund extensive renovations, believing the appreciation would be theirs alone. They were sinking their own money into my property, making my eventual reclamation all the sweeter. The date was set for a Saturday evening, a perfect opportunity for a public, undeniable spectacle. Mr. Henderson and I finalized the details. He had secured the forensic report on the forged medical documents, absolute, irrefutable proof of their criminal intent. He also had the original deed, the one they thought they'd made null and void, along with the detailed legal arguments for fraud in the inducement. We rehearsed my entrance, my words, the precise moment he would step forward. My heart hammered with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. This was it. The culmination of months of pain and meticulous planning. The evening of the party arrived, crisp and clear, a perfect autumn night. I dressed impeccably in my finest suit, a charcoal gray that Eleanor had picked out for me years ago. It felt like armor. Mr. Henderson met me outside the house, his expression calm and professional. Through the brightly lit windows, I could see the familiar rooms of my home, now filled with strangers. Their laughter echoed where Eleanor's gentle voice once resonated. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, a testament to Vanessa and Dylan's carefully curated social circle. At precisely 8 p.m., we walked up the flagstone path I had laid myself. The front door, now painted a trendy dark gray, stood ajar, welcoming guests. The sounds of music, clinking glasses, and animated conversation spilled out. I took a deep breath. The scent of expensive perfume and foreign food replaced the familiar aroma of Eleanor's cooking. My composure was absolute, a mask of serene determination. I stepped inside, briefcase in hand, Mr. Henderson a silent, formidable presence beside me. The room fell silent in waves. It started from the entryway and rippled outwards. Heads turned. Laughter died. Faces initially surprised morphed into expressions of confusion, then dawning recognition. Vanessa, holding a champagne flute, froze mid-sentence. Her smile dissolved. Dylan, by the fireplace I'd built, visibly paled. His confident posture collapsed. Brenda Martinez, standing by the bay window, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice cutting clearly through the stunned silence. It was steady, resonant, carrying the authority of years spent commanding construction sites, not the tremor of a frail old man. "I hope you don't mind me joining your celebration." Vanessa found her voice first, a high, brittle sound. "Dad, what are you doing here? This is completely inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I replied, my gaze fixed on her, unwavering. "Perhaps. But considering this is my home, I felt it was only appropriate that I attend." I walked slowly towards the center of the living room, the familiar space that now felt alien yet still mine. "You see," I continued, addressing the bewildered guests, "there seems to be a slight misunderstanding about the ownership of this property." Dylan finally moved, stepping forward, his voice a low growl. "David, you need to leave. You're confused. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly, Dylan," I countered, my voice calm, almost conversational. "I understand that you and Vanessa believed you had successfully tricked a grieving old man into signing away his life's work. I understand that you thought you could sell this house, put me away, and live off the proceeds of your deception." I set my briefcase on the coffee table, the one Eleanor and I had picked out, and opened it with deliberate slowness. "But you see, there was a flaw in your blueprint." I pulled out the original deed, the one they thought they'd rendered obsolete, and held it up. "This house, 1422 Maple Drive, has always been and remains legally my property." A murmur rippled through the guests. Vanessa's eyes darted wildly, her composure shattering. "That's impossible. We signed papers. You signed them." "Indeed you did," I acknowledged, my voice still even. "But you committed fraud in the inducement. You presented those papers under false pretenses, claiming my declining health necessitated the transfer. A premise, I might add, that was entirely fabricated." Dylan's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "This is insane. He's senile. He's delusional." "Am I?" I asked, turning to Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, if you would be so kind." My lawyer stepped forward, holding up a thick file. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance presented documents to their bank and to various medical facilities claiming Mr. David Vance was suffering from severe Alzheimer's disease, necessitating his placement in a care facility and the sale of his assets for his benefit." A collective gasp swept through the room. Brenda Martinez looked from Vanessa to me, her eyes wide with horror. "Vanessa, is this true?" "It's a lie," Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking. "Dad's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying." "I assure you I am not confused," I stated, my voice now carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "And neither is Dr. Elias Thorne, my longtime family physician." I then delivered the final, crushing blow. "Dr. Thorne explicitly refused to sign any documents attesting to my mental decline. The papers you submitted, Vanessa and Dylan, were forged." I pulled out the forensic report, its official seal prominent. "This report confirms the forgery. And this," I said, pulling out my small burner phone, "is a recording of a conversation between Vanessa and Dylan just days after Eleanor's funeral, discussing their plan to warehouse me and cash in on my home." I pressed play. Vanessa's and Dylan's voices filled the stunned silence, cold and calculating, discussing my burden, the house's value, and the ease with which they could put me away. The guests listened, their faces contorting from shock to utter disgust. Dylan lunged for my phone, but Mr. Henderson calmly stepped between us. "This constitutes criminal fraud and forgery," Mr. Henderson announced, his voice clear and resonant. "Mr. Vance is reclaiming his property, and we will be filing charges with the district attorney's office immediately." Vanessa collapsed onto a nearby armchair, sobbing hysterically. Dylan stood frozen, covered in sweat, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Their carefully constructed facade had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million pieces. The party, their new beginning, had become the stage for their public, undeniable humiliation. I watched them, my heart heavy with a profound sadness for the daughter I had lost, but also with a quiet, fierce satisfaction. Justice at last had arrived. The aftermath of the housewarming party was swift and brutal. Vanessa and Dylan's carefully constructed world imploded with the force of a controlled demolition. The guests, horrified witnesses to their public disgrace, melted away into the night. Their whispers and condemnations echoed long after their departure. Mr. Henderson wasted no time. Within hours, legal notices were served, demanding their immediate vacation of the property. The forged documents, the recorded confession, and Dr. Thorne's unwavering testimony formed an undeniable case. Vanessa and Dylan, stripped of their arrogance and their ill-gotten gains, had nothing left but their desperate lies, which now rang hollow. The legal proceedings that followed were mercifully brief. It was a testament to the overwhelming evidence against them. Vanessa and Dylan faced criminal charges for fraud and forgery. Their attempts to deflect blame, to paint me as a senile old man, crumbled under the weight of the forensic reports and the chilling audio recording. Dylan's business, already teetering on the brink, collapsed entirely under the weight of the scandal. Vanessa, whose social standing had been her currency, found herself utterly ostracized. The last I heard, they were facing significant prison sentences and were financially ruined. Their lavish dreams were replaced by the stark reality of their consequences. The daughter I had loved and the son-in-law I had once welcomed had vanished, replaced by bitter, broken strangers. The loss was profound, but it was a loss I had chosen to endure for a greater truth. Moving back into my home felt like breathing fresh air after years in a suffocating chamber. The house was exactly as they had left it. The expensive, impersonal renovations they'd begun now mocked their hubris. The new, trendy, dark gray paint on the front door, the modern light fixtures, the stark, minimalist furniture they'd chosen. It all felt alien, a stain on Eleanor's memory. My first act was to systematically undo their changes. I stripped away the new paint, revealing the warm, familiar oak beneath. I replaced their cold, angular furniture with pieces Eleanor and I had cherished, meticulously restoring the warmth and character they had tried to erase. My most significant act of restoration, however, was in Eleanor's beloved garden. They had let it wither, neglecting her vibrant roses and fragrant herbs. I spent weeks, my hands in the rich soil, coaxing life back into her carefully cultivated beds. I also embarked on a project Eleanor had always dreamed of, but we never quite got to. A small, glass-enclosed sunroom off the kitchen, where she could have her morning tea even in the depths of winter. I designed it with her in mind. Every beam, every pane of glass a tribute to her light. As the sunroom took shape, I felt her presence, a gentle warmth guiding my hands. This wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about honoring a legacy, healing a profound wound through creation. My bonds with genuine, supportive individuals deepened. Brenda Martinez became a constant source of comfort and companionship, visiting often, bringing her famous lemon bars and sharing stories of Eleanor that brought laughter back into my days. Dr. Elias Thorne, relieved by the truth, continued to be a trusted confidant, offering quiet support and professional validation. Ms. Evelyn Reed from Sunset Manor even visited, bringing a small plant for the sunroom, her knowing smile a silent acknowledgement of my resilience. I found joy in new routines, long walks through the neighborhood with Brenda, quiet afternoons in my new sunroom, sketching designs for local community projects, sharing my architectural wisdom with a new generation of aspiring craftsmen. The house, once a battleground, was now a sanctuary. It was filled not with the ghosts of betrayal, but with the vibrant spirit of Eleanor and the quiet contentment of a life reclaimed. I often sat in the sunroom, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the light play across Eleanor's flourishing garden. The pain of Vanessa's betrayal remained a faint scar, a reminder of the harsh lesson learned, but it no longer defined me. I had faced the darkness, navigated the deceit, and emerged stronger, wiser, and profoundly free. My legacy, Eleanor's legacy, was secure. I had not only taken back my home, but redefined my future on my own terms, living a life of dignity, purpose, and genuine, unconditional love. Hey viewers, welcome to the channel. We're just getting started, and your support means a lot. If you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and thanks for being here.